Welcome back to another episode of the Resilience Report. Today, we're going to be doing a solo episode where we're going to dive into what the term circularity means in the context of business. Now, like with any changing and growing industry, there are always new terms coming into play that we need to learn as business leaders. For the sustainability space, this has largely meant emissions or carbon neutrality or carbon avoidance. To be honest, many of the terms that we've been focused on over the past few years has been very much with that kind of carbon emissions lens and even blinders. However, with changing regulations as well as best practices, we are seeing new terms gain traction, one of which is circularity. And so today, if you are a business leader or an entrepreneur, I'm going to be diving in a little bit further with the aim of you being able to feel more comfortable at the end of this episode with the term itself, and maybe even being able to think of an area or two within your own business where you might be able to apply some of these concepts. In addition, if you are a consumer, as I mentioned, this term is becoming more and more common. You'll now be able to better understand the term circularity or circular when you see it on a product or a service. To help everybody get on the same page, this is going to be a short and sweet episode. So we're going to divide it up into a brief definition, the three concepts or pillars behind the term circularity. Then we're going to look at a few of the benefits. And finally, at the end, I'm going to give some examples of companies who are absolutely doing circularity right. And it might even give you some new ideas as to where you might want to go shopping in the future. For myself, I'll admit, when I was doing research for this episode, I discovered a company I'd never heard of before and that I will probably be shopping at in the next couple of weeks. So let's start off with a definition. The funny thing is that circularity is nothing new. In fact, it was a core part of how we did business for the longest time, and is even still common practice in many different areas of the world. The easiest way that I have come to think about circularity, often referred to as the circular economy when talking about in the context of business, is that it's an operational or strategic framework in which we try to keep resources in circulation as long as possible. We try to minimize waste, and we also try to ensure that materials are repurposed or regenerated. If you're still not sure what this means, let's compare it to the most common business practice or economy, which is more linear. This is really easy to digest. It's the typical model where we extract resources, we then make something, and then at the end of the life, we throw it away. And this is often referred to as the take, make, waste model. In contrast, the circular model or the circular economy is one in which we are trying to take those resources and bring them back into the system. This actually seems like a very logical model. As I mentioned at the top, this is maybe the way we often used to do business, or we're still seeing many businesses do this in certain parts of the world. But the reality is only 7% of the resources extracted in 2023 are being recycled or repurposed at the end of their life. I was completely shocked by the statistic, and it goes to show that there's a lot of opportunity for us to grow in this space. So to do so, we have the definition. Now let's look at the core principles. The first, as I mentioned, is really to reduce waste and pollution. This is often done at the very beginning of the process itself, in the design phase when you're trying to think of a product. So you are really going to be engineering it from that very first step so as to minimize waste. A good example of this could be you are thinking about how a product can be broken apart at the end so that it is more easily recycled and repurposed afterwards. It could also be thinking about extending your value chain, where maybe something that is a byproduct of your industry could actually be an input of another. So, for example, if you are producing a product that, let's say, uses part of a fruit or a vegetable, and then the rest of that you're not using can then be an input for another product or it could even go into kind of that energy generation based on waste. So there's a few different opportunities to think of as to how that end of life of your product or input within your product might reduce the waste itself. The second piece that we can look at is how do you keep resources in circulation as long as possible and really extending that life? We have a future episode coming up with a designer who talked to us about this episode. Who talked to us about this concept. So I cannot wait to share it. But he was working at a company that was designing furniture, and it was furniture as a service for commercial real estate. If you are like me and you've gone through different iterations of offices over the years, you know that when there's a new company coming in, often it's all new office furniture, or if you're changing your layout, then what happens to, for example, all those chairs and tables at the end? Well, this company actually rents them all as a service, takes them back at the end, and then breaks them down so that they can repurpose them and bring them back into the economy. Another example is a previous episode of the Resilience Report where we had Schwab Club on. If you listen to that episode, you know that this is where I get about 60 to 70% of all of my clothes over the past 5 years. And it is a boutique that specializes just in previously owned and loved items. And it's based on a credit system where you bring in clothing that I don't want to wear anymore. If they accept it, I get a credit per piece. And then I can go buy with that credit anything in this store with that one credit. So it allows me to ensure that what I'm maybe no longer fits me or that I don't want to wear anymore isn't going just into the garbage. And at the same time, I'm able to then not contribute to environmental impact by getting a secondhand piece as opposed to something net new. And then the third and final principle is really in regenerating natural systems. So we know at the end of the day, we will likely still have to continue to pull on certain resources. So what are we doing to be able to recreate or regenerate in those areas? This has been particularly popular in the area of regenerative agriculture. So, for example, you're seeing a few different cotton companies reinvesting into those fields, making sure that it's not monoculture, that it is a good investment in the long term for farmers, for the local communities. So, thinking about how you can invest in those areas where we are pulling those necessary resources. So, you have those definition and those three key pillars, which are reduce waste, keep materials in circulation as long as possible, and then finally reinvest in those natural systems. So, why would you, as a business leader or an entrepreneur, lean into circularity? Obviously, there's the environmental side. There's no denying that a core part of it is certainly helping to reduce our impact. However, beyond that, there is truly a business model and business reason to lean into circularity in your business. So, the first is cost savings. We are recording this in 2025. It is a highly inflationary period where everything costs a lot of money. Now, it's not always cheaper to lean into end of life products or kind of that circular model. However, there are a lot of opportunities where you can save a ton of money. Apple is doing this really well, kind of shockingly, that they are leaning on their end users and asking them to bring back their products at the end of life. And as a result, they're going in and breaking apart the products and pulling out the precious metals, resulting in millions of dollars of savings. The next area is to be a differentiator. If you're doing circularity right and you help educate the consumer as to why this is a better model for business, you really have an opportunity to stand out. Again, I think everyone has gotten to the emissions area. This is still an area that is relatively new within the market. So if you can lean into this into certain areas, it can really help you stand out. On a previous episode of the Resilience Report, we talked to founder David Coté from Loop Mission. And they are the number one seller of fresh pressed juices in all of Canada. Their entire model is based on circularity, and they're the number one company for these fresh juices because of the fact that they work with grocers and the middlemen in terms of converting perfectly good fruits and vegetables into juice when they would have otherwise gone to waste. And so this is really a differentiator for them in the market. and has proven to be wildly successful. And then finally is risk management. Personally, I think this is the top reason to look at circularity. Again, we are 2025. This is a very interesting time geopolitically around the world. So we're thinking about where we're pulling our resources from. If we have an opportunity to repurpose those different resources locally and not have to continue to lean into different markets, this significantly cuts down on our risks. We can all think of what happened in 2020, 2021 with the supply chain shortage. Does this solve it all? No. However, thinking about what are ways that we can lean into circularity to help minimize that risk is certainly interesting. So now that we've given a definition, core pillars, as well as some of the different opportunities that we can have as a result of circular business models, let's look at some businesses that are doing it right. To begin, our very last episode before this one, I absolutely encourage you to go check out, is with Julia Binder from IMD in Switzerland. And she is hands down an expert in circularity. I'm sure she could do the master's class on circularity, whereas this is maybe a little bit more a 101. But in her conversation, she called out Decathlon, the sporting good company, as being phenomenal and really kind of a global model as to what we can do with circularity. So I definitely invite you to go check that out. As I mentioned before, I've done a couple of episodes in the fashion space. I have a passion for fashion, and naturally, the first company we think about is Patagonia. They have a phenomenal section of their website where you can buy previously loved items. They also strongly encourage repair. So you can go in and you can get support directly at Patagonia to help extend the life of your product. But beyond that, I want to dig in a little bit deeper and see if there are any other fashion companies doing circularity well. And I stumbled across a company called Mud Jeans. Maybe I'm late to the party, but I've never heard of them before. And I'm excited to dive in further because if you know anything about denim, it's a very resource intensive item. It requires a lot of water, the cotton itself to grow it. Just the whole process itself is a little bit of a mess. And I've always actually had a really hard time finding great secondhand jeans. I don't know if it's because I'm really tall, but to be able to find that has always been an issue. So I'm going to be diving in over the next couple of weeks, maybe ordering a pair. I'll let you know how it goes. And certainly if you've ordered from them before, please do let me know. I'd be curious to have your feedback. But they essentially encourage their users to return their denim, they recycle it, and then they're able to create this new product. So I'll let you know how that goes, but they seem to be doing something phenomenal there as well. And then finally, let's maybe take it to a different area, IKEA. We have all furnished our homes in college and university, or we're just getting out of it with their furniture. And chances are you might have also gone onto places like Facebook Marketplace to go get secondhand items. I know my desk where I'm recording this is actually from IKEA, but from Facebook Marketplace. They recognize this, and instead of trying to put a stop to it, they actually leaned in further and are piloting a whole program where you can actually, as someone who has bought a product from IKEA, can go back onto their website and resell it there directly, so as to centralize the whole ecosystem. Again, these are just a couple of examples, but it really just kind of helps spark that interest and creativity of seeing how companies, whether it's food or if it's fashion or if it's sporting goods, there's all these different opportunities for us to lean into circularity. So I know that's a really kind of short and sweet episode. Again, my intention was for that you to be able to leave this episode to better understand what the term means, again, in contrast to that more linear model that we've been leaning into in Western society since basically the Industrial Revolution. Thinking about what it means, seeing how it doesn't go against economic growth. It is really just thinking about how can we decouple it from being so resource intensive as we're developing our respective products. And I would say my favorite thing in doing all of this research has been seeing the way in which circularity encourages all to kind of be more creative, whether it's from the design phase or the end of life, trying to work with our customers so that we can think of how do we get our products back. It forces us to challenge the status quo, see the waste, and be able to really work on that in creative, collaborative, ways. I'm absolutely fascinated by the idea of circularity. I know I'm going to continue to dig into it. I'm sure that with the regulation changes coming up in Europe, that we will see this directly impact a number of different companies where maybe we'll have to think about circularity more seriously. It might also help us with the definition. I will say that in doing the research, there's a little bit of a gray zone in terms of the different pillars. This is what I found to be as kind of core tenets of circularity, and I hope it helped you. And I really do truly believe that if we all incorporate a little bit of circularity into our business, that it will help us have that much more resilient growth. And I can't think of anything that we would want more, especially in this community. If you have other topics that you would like me to dive into, please do not be shy to reach out. I'd be happy to dive in, do the research, find those examples, and share them with you on a future episode of the Resilience Report.